We weren't recording, but now we are. Okay. So now, hello again. That's for the recording. Yeah. Okay. Now what? We have our validates. Ooh, I have an idea. Let's make it even more semantic because that's what a lot of this has to do with. So, a keg. Let's ignore for now the possibility of someone owning a keg. Let's pretend that's not a thing. I own the keg. This is my app. I'm not going to be in the app because they're all my kegs. So let's ignore users owning kegs. They have one purpose: to drink and steal my beer. So users is kind of a bad name, right? Kegs don't really have users. They have something else, like drinkers, alcoholics. Just another name. Let's say drinkers. So we want to be able to call .drinkers on our keg, right? Like keg.first, we were doing .users, but instead we want to make it more semantic, .drinkers. How would we do that? Does anyone know? Right? Yeah. We would have to make a method because that's just a method, right? And that's exactly what our validations are doing, or not validations, associations are doing. So we just have to, because this is creating that method, this is creating .users for us. So we would just have to change the name of this, right? I think.
Column drinkers is column users.
So we would change this to drinkers, yeah? And it's going through beers. So this, you're correct. So we're looking like, okay, through beers. So let's look at so what Active Record is going to do here, it's going to look at your beer model and say like,
not the database.
Not the database model. This is all like top level outside of your database. It's going to look in this file, and it's going to look in here and say, well, is there a drinker? Is there like a drinkers belongs to? No, there isn't. So it's not going to know what to do. It's just going to say like, nah, it doesn't exist, and that's it. So what do we have to do here? Not there. There. What are we going to have to do? We have to add another thing. We have to tell it what to look for. Does anyone know? Celine?
You have to give it the source.
Ooh.
You have to tell it where the source is.
Not source. Source. User. Does that make sense? So this, you're gonna tell Active Record, all right, it's through this association, and look for user.
Yeah. Where do I look for my drinkers?
It's not users. Good question, because it's user here, and it's also a many to many, and it's likely going to be a belongs to relationship, so it's going to be singular anyway. So it's going to look through and be like, okay, well, just look through that. Look through user, and then it's going to go to your user table and then get those objects back. Let's try it. See if I broke it.
It's also one of the most important things to wrap that around his face.
Yeah, so this is done a lot. But the reason that you name a model or a migration user or create users is it's the most like flaccid way to name something. Like you want to keep your models and your migrations as plug and play as possible. So like, oh, I want to reuse this. Okay, well you just take it, put it somewhere else because you named it user, and that can go anywhere. Or if you want to use another, you want to make another association with it, and it's not going to be your table. Like if you were to go back, like, oh, why don't you just rename user to drinker? Because that's like, why wouldn't you just do that? That makes sense in the context of this app. In the context of this app, for now, it does. But you want to be future thinking. So name it user, because maybe you want to have your user has to have something else instead of, it's not always going to be a drinker. Does that make sense? Did I just mumble my way through that? Because I did. Sorry. Absolutely. That was a great way to put it.
Yeah.
You should be sitting here, not me.
So a user is not necessarily a drinker, but to a keg, a user will always be a drinker.
That is a fantastic way of putting it. Man, that looks really cool. Okay, so now let's try out our new association. Notice, didn't drop anything, didn't do anything at our database level.
No, seriously.
Thanks, Celine. So
it's like it saves so much time.
it really does. It's a lifesaver to know that you don't have to drop every damn thing every time. So we already have a keg, right? We have keg. So let's grab our keg, and then what do we put here? And that returns all the people associated with that object. Isn't that neat? It's neat. What's up?
I was just saying this. Where do we put the drinkers? Where do we enter that in?
Like,
The previous one.
um,
How many drinkers?
yeah. So we just changed has many users through beers to has many drinkers source user. That's all we did.
So did we make drinkers anywhere else?
No,
Okay.
nope. It's all contained in this table or this model. Yeah. So that's another thing. It's all and exactly that one sentence, which was perfect. It's all contained in that one file, which is good. Because once you start webbing code out into the rest, you create dependencies. And then when you change one thing, you're going to have to change 10. And that's terrible. You won't remember, things will break, and then you'll have 5 minutes left on your assessment, and you won't know what to do.
That would be bad.
And that would be bad. So, great. So now we have this, which, yeah, and again, like Tyler said, this is very important. This is going to be done very often. Source is what you usually use in a through. Because you're gonna say like, oh, this is the source. Now, granted, this is pretty arbitrary, the naming. So we have this, which is the greatest thing. It'll become a Bible pretty soon. This says all, like, when you're using foreign key, when you have to use class name, and when you have to, what is this one?
I've never
Another
seen
foreign
this.
key, class name. Using foreign key and class name, isn't it like the best thing?
This is the coolest.
Travis sent that out in a big email.
I just didn't click the link.
Yep. One of the guys in my cohort put this together, and got a lot of us through the phase 2 assessment. So, yeah, I'm gonna send this out to your listserv.
He's also a massage.
Is that still what people say? Yeah, he's a massage therapist, and he's amazing. His name's Caleb, but he's probably only gonna be here for another week. So, yeah. So use this, read it, look at. It's one sentence for every one of these things, and these will be bewildering over the next week because when do you use one? When do you use another one? Refer to this, and you guys will be pros. Because it really is just a matter of knowing when to use what. Truthfully, yes.
Could you talk a little bit about where that is actually indicate the class name?
Class name?
Yeah.
Sure.
It's not done here.
Yeah, let's.
So like class many
Oh.
fruit and then class name orange. So why does that need to be listed?
Okay.
Orange.
Okay. So let's see. How can we put this in here? Basically, when you use class name, it's going to be when your tables are right next to each other, and you don't want to say necessarily, like, let's use this for example, orange tree. So when you do like orange tree dot first, you'll grab your first orange tree, and you don't necessarily you want it to have fruits instead of just oranges. So you'll say dot fruits, and then Active Record will look for a class. It'll look for a model file called orange.rb, and then it'll grab that and consider that fruits. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
That's
So it's
that
kind of similar to earlier. We use drinkers instead of
exactly. Truthfully, that's all most of this is just renaming things to make it more semantic in context. So this is just 100% preference. It's like, I want to find all of I want all of the fruits on this orange tree, which they're going to be oranges. So this is a really contrived example, but like orange tree dot fruits, it's going to look for orange.rb, and it's going to find it and say, okay, those objects, those ones are what I want this association to return. Cool. What else? There are a lot of fun things that you can do with associations, more advanced associations. And there's one, like, if we had, let's make another keg, so we can do this one.
So real quick, the belongs to association usually it's always associated with an object as opposed to just a strict ID.
Yes. So when, actually, it kind of depends. It's when you do a belongs to relationship, it's going to be referring to one of the one object, one other, or one table rather, and it's going to have the IDs in it, but it will return objects when you access that association. Did that explanation make any sense?
Not really.
Okay, so beer. You're talking about beer, right? Like belongs to.
Yeah.
So it's not. The association is going to have the objects in them. The table is going to have the IDs. So you're like your actual data that you're persisting is going to have like just integers in it. So beer, one of our entries has just 1 and 1. Like keg ID, user ID are both just integer 1 and 1. Your tables have no idea what to do with that, but the association does, and that's going to give you the object back. So you're not persisting those objects in any way related to beer. So like in your actual database, it is just a series of numbers. Active Record knows how to make sense of those. Is that a slightly better explanation?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that will create. Figured it out.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Is anyone super, super lost and wants me to explain anything further? No? Okay. Do you guys want to see another thing? Do you want to go? This has been going on for an hour and a half. And I'm perfectly happy with still going. So if you want anything, and we want any questions, for me to do anything else, let me know now.
When it does belongs to
Uh-huh.
keg and user.
Yeah.
How does it know that you're pointing to the user ID and keg ID?
So
With the-
when you do belongs to, it's going to look for this model, because associations look for the model file. It's going to jump over to your user, and then it's going to find the table that's associated with this model, the migration,
Okay.
and it's going to look in, and it knows to look for ID, because ID is a static element on that table. So, because you don't, like, ID is going to be there for every single table that you have, so it knows to look for that ID.
Okay. So by default, it just goes for the ID.
It just, by default, the belongs to will look for the ID. What's up?
Is also partly because is that the way we set it up in our migration.
What do you mean?
If we look at
Like,
years
yeah.
migration, yeah.
Well, in a way, yes, but user ID isn't going to necessarily help Active Record know what to look for, because this is just the name of the field.
There is a part in Active Record, I think we've already talked about it a little bit, where you can tell Active Record what the foreign key is.
Yeah.
If you need to point it towards the right sort of column entry in the long run. And that actually, I think, ties in with your question from earlier, whereas if you're given this huge set of data and you need to build a program around an already existing data set, if the right associations are built into that data set, then it's perfectly possible to just rename things and point them in the right direction in Active Record.
With a foreign key like that.
Yeah.
Good point. That was great. That was a great point. Good question, too. There are 2 more things I want to show, small things, and then I'll be done. You guys, you can leave whenever you want. But so I want to do find or create by, because I think that's going to be incredibly useful. So there's we have a few entries in our tables already, right? We have Celine and Tyler, and then we have PBR. Those are our 3 entries. And let's say we want to make a new user, but we're not sure what we have in our tables. So like if we want to make like a user, have you ever used find or create by?
Yeah.
Isn't it
Although
great?
find and create by.
So you just do user, because you could do user.create, but if you have validation like, oh, you can only have one user with this name, then it's just not going to do anything and you won't necessarily know. But you could do find or create by and name Celine. So what this is going to do, it's still going to return you an object, whether it's created or found. It's, you can find out which one it does, but it's either going to give you the one that's already in your table or it's going to make one for you. So once you start using Sinatra and you have to start doing stuff like that when you're creating a user or you're creating new information, find or create by is going to be something that if you don't use it, you're going to have to write a lot of logic around it to get that same functionality. So I'm literally just showing you this because it's a method that I didn't find for like 2 weeks. So use this. It's pretty great.
Pretty awesome. Stop me if you guys have already run into this too as well, but if over the weekend you want to kind of stretch yourself even more, database indexes are a fun thing to research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Google that because you'll be using it. One last thing that's pretty important about validations is to kind of conceptualize them in how they work and why they're useful over database constraints. So when would you use a validation? Simple question with a really simple answer. All of you know it. When would you use a validation?
When you want data in a specific way.
Exactly. Yeah, that's all it is. When you or let's use validates presence of. We have that already up here. Validates presence of name. So that's going to make sure that every time you try to insert something into your table, it's going to have a name. But that is run at the model level. That's run as Active Record does that for you. But if you have something on your table that you absolutely need to be not null, that is not what you wouldn't use a validation for that. If there's something that if it was null, everything would break, you would make that a database constraint, which you can do in Active Record. So it's important. That's really important to note. And now it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't a validation just catch that? Isn't that what it does? But when you're using, when you put something online, a website, and you have a lot of people doing a lot of things at once, let's say like 10 people try to make an account all at once. They all click the button at once, which is entirely possible. And let's say you needed them to have a unique username. But 2 people typed in the same username, but they both clicked it at once. There's a good chance, maybe not a good chance, but there's a chance that your validation won't catch that. And you'll end up having 2 things in your database with the same username. And then once you go to access those usernames, something is going to break. And it's going to break spectacularly, and your entire app is going to shut down, and you won't know why. So if you absolutely need there to be that constraint, put it on your database. Because when the user tries to do it, like when they both try to go at once, your database is going to catch it. And one person is going to get it, the other person is going to get it. Huge error, they're not going to know why, but your app won't break. One user will be slightly inconvenienced for 3 seconds, but your app will still function. So that's really important to keep in mind in the future when you're doing stuff like this.
How do we put that on the database?
I really like that question.
So do I. What do we do, Celine?
Well, what are we validating?
Let's validate uniqueness.
Uniqueness? This is a tricky... I have a feeling that the way I tend to validate uniqueness may be different from the way that you do, based on what we've set up now.
Mm.
In my explorations, the way that I was guided towards validating uniqueness is to add an index.
Really?
Really,
Interesting.
yeah. Database and uniqueness validations. They told me to add an index that says unique is true. But
Well, then let's just do not null.
okay. I
Is
mean,
that-
in this case, was what you're going for unique?
Single line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
just on just a basic like not null, because that's the most basic constraint, right?
Yeah.
Is just to make sure something has something in it. And I'm not entirely sure of the syntax, but is it just That
That's it. Or any variation thereof, really.
yeah,
As long
or
as
you know,
it's
if you want to
a
use,
hash.
if you don't want to use the hash rocket syntax, pretty sure that works as well.
Yep.
And yeah, so that'll hard code that into your database, and databases don't take shit from people, so it won't break, and it'll keep your data safe, and most importantly, it'll keep your environment from exploding. So
Could you, and this is actually a question for me, but could you do that with uniqueness as well?
I think so.
Like just right after the actual column entry, unique, true?
Yeah, I think so. Or you might have to do a stabby lambda, but I'm not entirely sure.
This is, I actually pulled up the page. Well,
Does anyone know about lambdas?
Lambdas and procs.
Yeah, lambdas and
I
procs.
kept trying to get Baker to give that lecture
No
again,
problem.
but there was just no time.
Yeah, lambdas are crazy. They're a lot of fun.
There's like API doc has a pretty cool like add-on about like what happens
Okay.
when two users are on there at the same time, and there's like I really like this comment actually that suggests indexing
Okay. Yeah, that makes
with
sense.
just uniqueness. Yeah.
So an index you would do after the change method, right?
Yeah.
It's just
I think so.
add index.
Oh no, you'd have to do it within the change method,
Okay.
but after the table method.
Add index what? Name, right?
Yeah, yeah. Add index name,
Uniqueness.
uniqueness true. Oh no, you have to specify the table first too.
Oh. Add index users,
Yeah,
and then
and then name,
name.
and then uniqueness true.
Uniqueness. Is that spelled correctly?
Sorry, I keep giving you bad information. It's unique true. I just don't know what I'm doing really.
That looks really wrong.
It says. I've
No,
used it
like
before.
unique. The spelling of unique.
Oh.
Yes.
No,
correct.
that's the way my thrift store spells it.
Awesome. Sorry, I'm terrible at spelling. Okay, so that's uniqueness. What's up?
Instead of no false, could we have just put unique true up there?
Probably.
We think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
Don't see why not.
Something to try.
But the downside of that as well, not what you just said, because yes, you can do that. The downside of database constraints is if you use them to like super liberally, there's a good chance that users will get many errors, and that's not necessarily what you want either. So like you don't need to null false every field on your tables. It's just a little redundant. So yeah, that's all I wanted to show you. You probably won't encounter database constraints versus validations because I doubt, unless you guys are clearly amazing. But I don't know if the Heroku apps that you guys make will have thousands of users passing through. So you probably won't encounter a time when validations won't work during phase 2. But in the future, it's just something cool to keep in mind. Is there any final questions? Anyone? Yeah.
Your seed file, you created records for the two keg and for the user, but you didn't create the errors.
Right.
Should we be doing that there and stuff we're doing?
So if you want to hard code out your join table entries, because when you associate two things, it'll make that for you. It'll make that join table entry for you. So you really shouldn't have to make any entries in your join table anywhere.
A sort of real life example would be like if you're building an app and you already have things that exist. So like if we're building an app, for just a random example, an app where users could count the number of beers they've had from which keg, and you already knew that like 5 users had 2 beers, then you could hard code it into the seed file. But in the context of this app, every user is starting fresh, so you'd want the code to be able to create the beer objects as they go, right?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for coming, everyone.